This podcast is in partnership with Fill Your Boots. My mate Sean Phelan has been matching clubs with players and players with clubs for over 6 years to help get grassroots rugby games played. Head on over to fybrugby.com to register yourself or your club to help grow the game. You'll also be part of the Rugby social network and enjoy tons of resources, special deals and FYB TV. Go register at fybrugby.com today.
He did something which impressed me times two, and that is the first thing he did with this bunch of sort of 30 eager young referees is he picked the law book up and he threw it sort of 10 yards across the room, and it went straight into the waste paper bin with a beautiful clatter. He was a college lecturer, so I think it was a technique he'd mastered over many years. And he said, "That's the law book," he said. "We won't be needing that."
Welcome to episode 91 of the Amateur Rugby Podcast, here to help soothe your Sunday morning hangover with some vibrant rugby chat about the grassroots of the game. I'm your host Tim, and today I'm in Ubud in Bali, Indonesia, home of the scenic rice fields and about as much spiritual healing as one soul can take. And this weekend I'm about to head off and do something really interesting, so hang around and wait till the end to hear about that. Now, what did you think about last week's episode with Sean Phelan? Hard to not get carried away with his love of the game, right? I'd love to hear your feedback too at AM Rugby Podcast on Twitter or email to hello@amateurrugbypodcast.com. But my guest this week is Ellingham and Ringwood RFC President, Mr. Steve Benson. This interview was recorded in September of 2022 and we talked about Steve's playing days, which is still going on by the way, his years in refereeing, and some incredible insight in what it takes to start minis, juniors, girls and women's rugby sides. We chat about all the good things going on at Ellingham and Ringwood, including the 15-year process of moving the club to a new ground and building a clubhouse. And we discuss the absolutely wonderful Fancy Dress Sevens and Beer Festival. Steve is a powerhouse of positivity, and I'm pretty sure I grinned all the way through our chat. There's tons in this week's episode, so please welcome Steve Benson. Steve Benson, welcome to the Amateur Rugby Podcast.
Great to see you, Tim. Thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Now, I'm going to start off with a story from last summer, because I saw you refereeing a game of touch, and at some point during the game, you ordered a spanking of one of the players. Now, do you remember that moment?
I don't know. No.
Well, I should enlighten the listeners then, because it was my nephew who had accidentally run into a female far too hard, and it was his father that you got to theatrically spank him as punishment.
Well, I think it was absolutely well deserved, and it couldn't have happened to a nicer lad.
Well, it seemed to go down well with everybody concerned. It was very funny. So it was on the back of that, really, and many other things that I wanted to get you on the podcast to talk about it. So let's start off with that day. That day was a beer festival / fancy dress sevens tournament, I believe. Could you tell me a little bit more about it and how it all came about?
Okay, well, it goes back when we first met today. It was up at Picket Post, and the first festivals of Real and Touch Rugby were up at Picket Post, and it was all part of our fundraising to raise enough money to build our new clubhouse and ground down in Ringwood. So they started in, I suppose, the mid 1990s with a brainchild of a woman called Sharon Evans, who was a member of our club, but was also one of the RFU's community rugby coaches, and we ran this as a bit of an experiment for the first time, and we made a few £1,000s out of it, which for a small community club was a lot of money. And these days we run it, and we probably raise somewhere in the region of £10,000. So it's a really, really important part of our budget in not so much building the club now, but actually just running the club and keeping all the bills paid. Even more important, as you can appreciate, with the cost of living crisis we've got coming over the hill.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, that's the financial side. But like I said, I was there this last one, the first one that I've attended. How much fun is it as well? It's such a fun day.
No point organising it if it's not fun. And for those that have not experienced it, it's a fancy dress touch rugby tournament. We have teams coming from wide area. It's got quite a reputation for itself. We've got men's teams, women's teams, mixed teams, all competing against each other, which you can do with touch rugby. Some of them are really serious. A team called the Sandbaggers, made up of a group of local doctors who all played for us. They really like to win the tournament if they can, whereas other people are just really entering it for the fun. And while this is all going on, there's a massive festival of real ale and cider going on in the background. So as you can imagine, the quality of the rugby tends to deteriorate as the day goes on. And by the sounds of it, so does the quality of the refereeing as well.
It was brilliant. Yeah. So just say a little bit about the real ales and all the local breweries that you got involved and how you went about that.
Well, again, all the credit must go to Sharon Evans for the work she did back then. But it's grown and it's evolved, and a woman called Erin Lee has been running it for many years, and she's in the process of handing it over to the next person that's going to be running it. We've got the Ringwood Brewery in town, who were huge supporters of the event in the early days, and in fact, Nigel Welsh, one of the joint owners, his son Tom, played for the club, so there was a real sort of connection there. But of course, Ringwood Brewery sold out to Marston's, but actually Marston's were really good and they carried on supporting it. But unfortunately, Masters have now sold out to Carling, and we're just not getting the support anymore. But fortunately, these days we have breweries from all over the place wanting their beers to be there, and we certainly have no shortage of beers and no shortage of people drinking them.
Yeah, well, I've got to be honest. I might be looking to arrange my travel schedule around that next year, because it was that much fun.
Well, I think we could have a Tunnicliffe team in with so many of you playing rugby. It would be really good.
Yeah, that would be fun. Okay, we alluded to it a little bit there. That the previous ground where the club first started, but now the new facilities. Take me back to when you first came to this part of the world and what you experienced at the old ground.
Well, my roots are all in North London and Hertfordshire, and that's where I started playing my rugby. And I moved down in 1979. And I can remember driving across the New Forest got a job and a flat in Bournemouth. And halfway across the New Forest, I could see this pair of rugby posts right in the middle of the New Forest. And I just remember driving past it the first time and thinking, that looks really interesting. I'm going to have to go back up there. And anyway, beginning of the following rugby season, I went up and was made very welcome. And I ended up playing rugby there for probably 30 years, I expect. And I still play cricket there today. And it's a lovely setting on a beautiful day. But as I mentioned in the introduction, in the winter, in the cold and the wet, it's a completely different place. And we definitely couldn't be running the sort of club that we're running now, still out of picket post. But we did have some great days up there.
Yeah, I'm sure. And the wild horses, were they any kind of an issue?
Oh, goodness me, yes, we got horses and cows and even sometimes pigs running across the pitch. And many a time a game has stopped as dozen horses have just gone running across the pitch and interrupted the game. And I can remember playing a series of London Old Boys teams in the early rounds of the old National Cup that we had, and they came down and they'd not seen anything like this at all before, and they absolutely loved it. It was just a different rugby experience to what they were used to week in, week out.
Yeah, I'm sure. Just up on the side of the hill there, an old sort of shed as a clubhouse. Tell me about some of maybe the after-match festivities that would have gone on.
Oh, goodness me. I mean, the beauty of it was a shed in the middle of the New Forest, and the nearest house was probably over a mile away. So all the restrictions we've got in our current rugby club didn't exist back then. And I always remember Clive Cashel, who is still actually working for the RFU as a training officer, driving into the petrol station next door with his 2 young daughters in the car, and as 2 naked men went running around the roundabout, and he thought, what on earth's going on here? And it was our 2 players who'd made fools of themselves on the day. It was their punishment week in, week out to do a quick naked jaunt round the roundabout. And far from being offended, he made a mental note and came back and played for us for the next 10 years. But,
fabulous. You certainly couldn't do that in the middle of town, could you? Really?
Definitely not. No.
Okay, so that was the old days out there in the beautiful countryside, but you decided to move grounds and kind of start fresh. Tell me why did you do that?
Well, the ground was just becoming no longer fit for purpose as a playing surface for the level of rugby we played. We'd gone up through the leagues quite a bit, but the facilities were absolutely dreadful. We probably had 3 shower heads between 30 odd players, and the referee had to share with one of the teams, and we had occasions where we've had female referees, and what on earth, what was sort of fine and fit for purpose in the 60s and early 70s was definitely not fit for purpose. But the more important aspect is we developed by that time a really successful mini and junior rugby section, and particularly a girls and women's rugby section. And it's phenomenal, really, when you look back, that we did that with so little facilities. And we ran those predominantly out of a junior school playing field and community building down in the town. And we really wanted to have everything together, and we needed state-of-the-art facilities to continue to attract players, and that's what we set out to do. It probably took us 10 or 15 years to actually achieve it, but no, it really, well, as you've been down and you've seen it, and it's a beautiful facility we've got now. We're very lucky.
Yeah, I completely agree. Let's go into one of those little threads there. The minis and juniors. When was that started, and how did you go about it?
I took a phone call from my son's godfather, actually, who had a son who was slightly older, and he was starting to run just one junior team with his son in it and a few others, and he realised he'd probably bitten off more than he could chew, and as well as needing to teach them rugby. And of course, there was all of the various safeguarding issues, far more these days than there were back then. But he realised that he needed to, a bit more support and needed to professionalise it. And he contacted me, and I contacted a few others. So we started then, and our strategy, his lad was probably close to playing adult rugby. It was probably about a under-16s team, and we carried on supporting that. But our actual strategy was we started to develop an under-7s side from the local infant school, and we recruited them at the under-6s age group. So we went in over the summer term and introduced them to rugby. People like Clive Cashel, who I mentioned, was very involved in supporting that. So in the first year we ran an under-7s team, and we pushed them up, and the following year we did the same again, and a 7s and an 8s, and then 7s, 8s, 9s, and so on, right the way through until we're running sides in every age group, boys and girls now. So it was a long-term sort of strategic approach that we took to it, rather than trying to run everything at the same time. And I think that was the right approach. The thing that caused a few problems was probably when we had a sort of 3 sides up to under 9s, we had a whole group of really keen under 11s players that wanted to play as well, and we didn't want to lose them. And actually, that group of players have all gone on to play rugby, first team rugby for our club, and actually some of them have gone on and played some really good quality rugby elsewhere. But we were able to keep them involved without them. We never had enough of them to play a full team, but we worked and we developed their rugby, but then we sort of would lend them to other clubs who were short for a competition or something like that. And we were just imaginative in the way that we went about it, and had a lot of fun doing it. And interestingly, the spin-off development for that was we had a really vibrant bunch of parents, a few of whom had played rugby before, many of whom hadn't, and they were really getting into it. And at the time, the club was only running one team, and actually most of those coaches went on to start playing second team rugby, and some of those then went on to play first team. So a spin-off benefit wasn't just the youngsters we were getting, but actually we were getting their parents involved in playing rugby as well. Some of them for the first time, some of them returning to the game.
Fabulous. That's brilliant to get that double benefit from, an initial idea. And I love the way you went about it, just doing one team at a time, because then you take it, you learn your lessons, and then you implement it better the next year, and it keeps on getting bigger and bigger without ever, probably, hopefully anyway, over sort of it all getting too much maybe for the club.
Yeah, our nearest neighbours are Fordingbridge Rugby Club, and I suppose by the time we were probably running all the mini age groups to under 12s, they were looking at this and thinking we really ought to be doing that as well. And I'm very friendly. In fact, I played a season for Fordingbridge many years ago, and they came down and they actually brought a number of their sons and daughters and youngsters down. And they were very open about it. They said, we're coming down to our children can play for your club this year and next year, but we want to learn from what you're doing. And they did. And they've got a really thriving mini and junior section up there now. And for me, it's all about the more people that are playing the sport, the better. And it's great to see other clubs develop as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I'd love to hear clubs collaborating like that. There's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't. Everybody's trying to hopefully get to the same end. Now, tell me about the women's and girls section. When was that started? And did you go about it in the same way, or was it a slightly different process?
That was probably more opportunistic than strategic. We had a couple of girls that were playing in our boys' teams through the sort of under 7s, 8s, 9s. Two of them are Bryony and Poppy Clear, who are both playing, were both playing for England against the USA on Saturday. And we had a couple of girls in the age group below that. And then we had my daughter in the age group below that. And basically it was pressure from my daughter that what are we going to do once I get to 12? And so I committed myself to, sort of saying, well, we'll get something working. And girls rugby was very different back in those days. And
when are we talking?
They were I suppose it must have been early part of this century. My daughter was born in 89, so she would have been just turn of the millennium, I suppose. And when you look back on it, the breadth of the age groups that they played in, Charlotte would have been playing under 12s as an 11-year-old, and she was playing jointly with girls who went up to the age of 14, and that's a big difference at that age group. And I can think of a couple of those girls that she was playing against, Kay Wilson in particular, who went on to play fullback for England and was her flatmate at university some years later, was probably a couple of years older than her, and she certainly had her hands full sort of coping with those. And when you look back on it, it was great development, but probably it certainly wouldn't be allowed these days in safeguarding senses. And it's evolved over that time, and we were getting really some of the best female athletes in the schools, and I have to say that Bryony, Poppy, and my daughter Charlotte, and a few others were very good at approaching the best hockey players and netball players and sprinters and shot putters and saying, "Have you ever tried rugby?" And so we got to the stage where we got sides in every age group, and we were hugely successful. I remember probably the pinnacle for me was when both our under 18s girls, which had Bryony, Poppy and my daughter in it, and the under 14s girls both won the National Sevens tournament up at, I think it was played at Harpenden Rugby Club. We beat London Irish in the final, and two or three of the girls that were playing in the London Irish side are also current England internationals at the moment. And they were really great days, great fun, and all I can remember of those days is fun and laughter. Really, it was we just had so much fun along the way.
Oh, brilliant. That's so good to hear. And I just going back to how girls and women's rugby used to be, because obviously it's made huge strides since then. But yeah, I just imagine that girls that want to play rugby just had to convince a load of other girls to play rugby with them. Otherwise, there was no game.
Absolutely. And there's a fella called Steve Carey, who's a great friend of mine. And he and I and our two wives, Marion and Bex, we're going off to New Zealand in about 6 weeks' time to watch our girls in the World Cup. And Steve was the PE teacher of Poppy and Bryony at Burgate School up in Fordingbridge, where they went. And we're meeting up with Mandy and Pete Cleal, who Poppy and Bryony's parents. So it really was some good fun times.
Wow, I am insanely jealous. New Zealand's one of my favourite countries to go to, and to go there to watch people that you know incredibly well and have had an intrinsic part of their development has been you've been involved with, must be wonderful.
It was tremendous, and I think it's really important also to highlight that out of that team, we had 4 women playing in the Six Nations that were in that team that won. There was Donna Rose, who lives just a stone throw from the club, now plays for Saracens, and she's playing for Wales and will hopefully be playing for Wales in the World Cup. And Lisa Coburn, another prop, who was in that same team, who's playing for Scotland at the moment. But unfortunately, Lisa damaged her ACL in the game against England in the Six Nations last year. So it looks as if she won't be going to the World Cup, which is a huge shame because she's a great player.
Yeah, that is a shame. Now, is there any magic secret? What can you put it down to? Is it something in the water down here, or was it your coaching, Steve?
It certainly wasn't my coaching. That's for sure. But you're absolutely right. It was an incredibly talented group of female rugby players who Lisa came from further afield. Lisa lived in Basingstoke and knew we had a decent side and came down here to play. But the rest of them were all local. They were all in Ringwood, Fordingbridge, surrounding areas. And I get as much pleasure actually out of the number of those girls as they were, women as they are now, people like Amy Shipley and Hannah Walraven, who are still playing for our women's team now. And they've all developed their rugby careers at, some of them have done it professionally, which they couldn't have imagined at the time because there was no professional women's rugby. And some of them are just doing it as their pastime, fitting it in amongst their and they're all enjoying their rugby just as much.
Fantastic. Now, what is the latest as you see it in the adult women's professional game? How do you see it going at the moment? Do you think it's in good health and going in the right direction, or do you think there's more that can be and needs to be done?
I think they're just at the beginning of a journey, really, a professional journey. And it doesn't seem that long ago, does it, that we were starting that professional journey in the men's game. And, when people like Brian Moore and Jason Leonard were, sort of setting off on those professional journeys, having played amateur rugby for many years, the same is certainly true. I think at the top level, certainly England as a professionalised club are seeing the benefits of that. For me, the next stages of the development have got to be that a number of the other nations become fully professionalised. I think I saw that Ireland have gone. Certainly, I know Donna Rose is on a contract for Wales now, so that's healthy to see. But those international sides all need to become fully professionalised, and their unions really need to put that level of commitment into it. I mean, look at the the Lionesses, the football side, and look at the coverage that they got, and it was tremendous. It was some of the best football that I've watched for a long time. It was football like I remember it back in the 60s and 70s, and I got huge pleasure out of watching that. And we've got to aspire to that same thing. But I guess equally, we've got to be looking at the level below the Premiership and making sure that there are the proper pathways. And we've got to be developing more girls rugby clubs. I mean, you look in Hampshire, I think we're very successful at developing girls rugby teams. We've got ourselves at Ellingham and Ringwood, there's Trojans, there's Basingstoke, there's Havant, there's a number of other clubs. But actually, we probably need to double that number and then probably double it again to be really embedding the sport properly.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a huge swell, I think, for quite some time, but the Lionesses over the summer in this country, I think that just made girls sport in particular, I think, just feel like it's gone on a super surge, and it just needs to be harnessed somehow.
Absolutely. My daughter is a PE teacher, and she studied at UWIC, and I remember back in I'm going back probably 10 years or so now, when she was at university, sort of writing a thesis on the way that women's sport could develop, should professionalise itself. And I remember thinking, this is what should happen, but is it going to happen in my lifetime? And actually, it's happened, I think, probably a lot quicker than a lot of us thought it would. And that's certainly really good news.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I agree. I think it has gone further and quicker than I expected as well. Let's go back a little bit now to you as a coach, Steve. How would you describe your coaching style?
I would like to see myself as an empowering coach, a coach who is giving players freedom to develop. And I learnt a lot of that from the work I did within the women's game, rather than, I think, when I need to stress that my coaching was started at mini rugby when I was coaching the under sevens, and I did go on and was director of rugby and did a bit of coaching with our men's team. But my coaching has all been with the junior game and with the with the girls game, and then on into the women's game. So I haven't got sort of huge coaching expertise, but certainly when I was coaching Ellingham's Ellingham's girls team, and I was then asked to coach at the county level, and then asked to coach at the regional level. Some of the coaching courses that were done at that time were phenomenally good, and taught me a great deal about giving players the freedom to find out things for themselves, to experience things for themselves, to experiment, and not to worry too much about the result on Saturday at that level, or Sunday as it was for the for the girls, but actually has that player improved. But my son's he coaches our women's team now. He's just passed his level 3 qualification, and I look at what he's doing and I stand back in awe. The level I was coaching at was just playing at it, really. And I know you've done your level 3 coaching qualification as well, so you will have experienced the same sort of things. But I enjoyed my coaching, but I wouldn't describe myself as a great coach. I would like to think, as much as anything, I enthused the players to play. That was probably my best quality.
I think that as a coach, particularly in the minis and juniors and players who are developing, is probably the single most important factor. Like, if you have kids and young adults that are happy and enjoying themselves and want to come back next week, that's probably the single most important thing. So I don't think it's necessarily important what level qualification you have. It's what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And yeah, it seems like particularly on the basis of the minis and juniors success that I know you've had in recent years in terms of growth of numbers, it seems like that filters throughout the club. Could you just sort of say a little bit about how you've managed to do that within your club? Because from what I understand, the numbers just keep growing year on year.
Well, I think we certainly do seem to be bucking the trend. I talk a lot with colleagues around the county, and people are talking about difficulty in retaining players, and they particularly talk about the fall off between playing junior rugby and playing adult rugby. And I think you certainly see that in football as well. My understanding is very few junior football players go on and play adult social football, which is a tragedy for the game, especially as there's so much junior football around. We really don't have that problem. And out of a squad of probably 25 in our first 15, probably over 20 of those were former mini and junior players. And maybe that's partly the demographic of us being a small market town. But I think there is something about that enthusing people and making it an enjoyable experience. And a lot of people experience difficulties with obviously people going off to university and then leaving the club. Of course, we have that. The majority of our young players go on to university, but nearly all of them come back, and they don't just come back at the end of university. Most of them will be on the phone to us saying, well, I'm coming home for, Dad's birthday this weekend. Can I have a game for the third team this week or whatever? And I think just having that sort of culture where it's their club, they come back to their club, they have fun with their club, they meet up with their mates. It's the place where everyone gets together at Christmas because you're all sort of coming back. And by the way, we'll have 2 or 3 games together over the Christmas holidays. That seems to be doing the trick for us. But I don't think you can ever be complacent. And I suppose that, compared to when, I was playing sort of, rugby, sort of back in the 70s and 80s. That's what we did on a Saturday, and there wasn't, that was our life, and we would play a game of rugby, and then we'd go and have a few beers and things in the evening. I think the youngsters have got so many other choices now, haven't they? So many other sports, so many other, pastimes, so many other pressures. People working, having to work to earn sufficient money. It's a 7-day-a-week life, isn't it? And certainly probably harder today than it was back then.
Yeah. So have you not, have you implemented any specific strategies or anything like that to try and encourage that behaviour, or has it just happened, do you feel, organically?
I think it's probably more organic, and I don't think we've had to implement any strategies because it's not been a problem to us. But I know Hampshire did a series of sessions just after the pandemic with a variety of clubs, and we participated in those, about looking, about what were the best ways to and how can you retain people in the rugby clubs, and how can you attract those that have gone back into it. And I think if it was a problem, we would need to be having a strategy, but fortunately for us at the moment, but it is something you need to carry on working at, and you need to make the membership of the club attractive and the fun thing to do.
Well, you mentioned something to me earlier, which could just be a good example of that. It might be something you're doing all the time anyway, almost without realising it. Like you mentioned, there's going to be an event around Oktoberfest. So things like that, people will notice and will, it'll be something for them to make a decision about, rather than just, the rugby club's always there kind of thing.
Yes, I think you've always got to make things, and that was, I could take no credit for that. That's our Becky, our new bar manager, is looking at that. We got a group of old boys coming down from Esher Rugby Club. They before the pandemic, they came down every year for a local beer festival and always came and watched our game. And we normally allow on a lunch for them. And this year we're going to make it a themed around Oktoberfest. Which and you're right, those sort of things make it interesting, and people think, well, that looks a good weekend. We'll go along and watch that. And that's exactly the same with the beer festival you talked about earlier. That people love coming back at Easter for that. And while they're back, they'll probably play a couple of other games for the club while they're there. We also play a fair bit of cricket through the close season. We've got a rugby club team that plays the local pub cricket side, the Toads, and again, it's another opportunity for players for the first, second, third team, and actually some of our junior boys and girls have joined into those games, and it's just doing something socially over the summer. And I know your brother Chris, all the work he does with the summer touch rugby, and just keeping people in touch with the club all the time and making it the place to go.
Yeah, I think that's a really important one, because it's it's easy to drift away. It's easy to just suddenly not to become a priority, or you forget how good it was, or all those kind of things. So just having a regular touch point, I think, is really important.
Definitely.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go right back now. How did you first get involved in rugby?
Oh, I've got a big confession here, Tim. I come from a really, really big football family, and when I left, when I was at the tail end of school, and just after leaving school, I was and still am a great Arsenal fan, and I was living in North London at the time, and most of my Saturdays were spent on the North Bank at Highbury watching Arsenal. And I'd had some great years watching them in the win the double in 1971, but I think it was about 75 or 76. There were a group of four of us going up to watch them every week, and they lost virtually every game. And Arsenal have never been relegated from the top flight, but my goodness, that year they came very, very close. And a mate of mine called Niels Peterson, who I went to school with, who was a very good hooker, said to me, I've had enough of this. He said, I'm going to go and play rugby next week. Anyone fancy joining me? And all three of us said, yeah, we're there. And so that was my first experience. We all played a little bit at school, and but we went down to the Batavians Rugby Club, which was linked to British Aircraft Corporation in Stevenage. Fantastic club. They used to run 6 sides plus a Colts. They had, I think, 4 pitches, beautiful changing rooms, beautiful bar, beautiful kitchen. Absolutely everything was done for you there. The meals were cooked, the bar was run for you, the shirts were washed for you. And then I came down to that, moved jobs and came down to that shed at Picket Post where I met you. So where absolutely everything was done by volunteers. So I'd gone from one extreme of a rugby club to another extreme. And that was 1979, and I'm still here with a few. I played for Fordingbridge for a year and spent a few years out refereeing. But that was my introduction to rugby.
That is fabulous. I always ask that question, and there's some common threads. There's a lot of people with the same kind of story. I've never had my football team was rubbish, so I started playing rugby. That's a new one. Thanks for that, Steve. Okay, let's jump forward a little bit from there then. Oh, actually, no. Let's talk about you as a player. What position were you, and what would you say your strengths were?
I think I played backs. I played a fair bit at fly half and at fullback. I think most of the players playing with me would probably say my greatest strength was avoiding a tackle, but I slowly gravitated lower and lower in the numbers, and at the age of 65 I still turn out with your brother playing in the third team of veterans, and these days I've always got a number 2 or a number 3 on my back, and funnily enough I absolutely love the playing in the front row, the sort of one-on-one competitiveness. And I know you played loosehead yourself, and I never thought that at age 65 I'd still be playing sort of social rugby, but I couldn't have done that playing out in the backs. But actually, you get into the pack and you can still do a job. So
why are you still playing? That's the big question. I think it's fantastic, but what is it that makes you keep putting the boots on and getting out there?
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, I really enjoy playing with a group of players that I'm playing with, and while I still think I'm adding value to things, and most of the time I do, and occasionally I think, well, I'm not, and why am I still doing this? And that's the point when you really stop think about it. But I got a son and daughter who keep sort of egging me on a bit, and so I say, you can't give up yet, Dad. You're only 65. You've got another few years. And I do remember playing a tour game against a veteran side from Kent, and they said we've got a hooker who's turning 70 next week, and this is going to be his last game of rugby. They said, but don't go easy on him. And my goodness, I'm glad we didn't, because he was a formidable hooker, and really a very sort of strong and physically fit man. And he told me at the end of the game, we were having a beer, and he said, I'm age 70. I really do think I've got to hang up my boots and stop playing now. He said, so I'm going to start refereeing. And I thought, isn't that great? But he still needed to do something on a Saturday afternoon that was involved in rugby. And I guess I must be that same type of person.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I understand you might have played fly half outside someone of a decent stature. What was that story?
Well, Nigel Starmer-Smith, yes, yeah. I was a steward at Twickenham, and there was probably about a dozen of us in the club that were stewards at Twickenham for a period. And it was a charitable event. Unfortunately, Nigel Starmer-Smith lost his daughter and to a rare illness, and he was doing a fundraiser, and it was the English stewards against the Welsh stewards, and we had a former chairman, the chairman of Ellingham and Ringwood before me, a fellow called Dick Birch, who was a Royal Marine and served in the Falklands. And I was playing fly half, and there was a youngster playing at scrum half. And the next thing I saw, this youngster was clutching his hand, and I called Dick over and said, "What's the problem? What's happened?" He said, "Well, I stamped on his hand, of course." I said, "Why'd you do that?" He said, "We got an England scrum half on the touchline." He said, "Why don't we get him on?" And anyway, this poor lad went off and didn't play for the rest of the game. And I played outside Nigel Starmer-Smith. I remember him firing his first ball at me. It was about sort of 15 yards in front of me. And I thought, what sort of pass was that? And he called me over and he said, "Steve," he said, "if you can just sort of start running, then maybe I pass it 5 yards back. We might have a relationship here." And after that, we got on. So yeah, wonderful day. And we beat the Welsh side, and his son scored the winning conversion. I remember it well, up at Oxford Rugby Club.
Fabulous stuff. Good stuff. Now then, where should we go next? Let's talk about the move. Let's talk about the move from the old club to the new club. We talked about why it happened and the reasons behind it. Can we talk now about the process of exactly how you went about it and the pros and cons now of the new club compared to the old club and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was a huge task, and I say it took probably 10 or 15 years. And if you spoke to my wife, she'd say it probably nearly cost us our marriage as well, the amount of time that was invested in it. But the first thing we did manage to do was find a site, and it was with Dick Birch, who I was talking about. Actually, he and I went and viewed this site that we're on now, which is actually the playing field for Ringwood Junior School, but it's about a quarter of a mile away from the school, and it was a piece of sports ground that just wasn't being used. It's what they call a detached playing field with a footpath to the school, and so we came up working with New Forest District Council and their sports development team with a proposal where we would put a clubhouse on the site and get our 2 pitches there, and we would lease the site from Hampshire County Council, and we would make the ground available and the building available for the school Monday to Friday 9 to 5, and that's an arrangement that's been going now for 15 years, I suppose, and works very, very well. They've got a breakfast club that they use there, after school club, when they have their sports days and things like that. They've got fantastic facilities where parents can have a cup of tea and the kids can use the changing rooms and things. So it's worked very, very well. But the issue was the whole thing was going to cost £850,000 was the estimate, I remember, and we'd got about 10,000 at the time, I think, and so we had to start, and it was a long slog. We managed to first of all get the local authority to commit some of their developers' contributions to the site that were allocated for sports facilities. We got a grant from Sport England. We got a grant from the RFU. We got a loan from the RFU, which we're still paying off. I think we should be paying that loan off, and probably within the next year. And I think there's 10 of us that are still guarantors to that loan, and that was quite a big thing at the time. That we'd got the loan, and that was great news. And then actually 10 members of the club have got to guarantee that loan over a 10-year period, and that's a big ask for some people. So huge process. Then there was getting planning permission, dealing with all the objections that there were, letting the building contract, realising the building contract was going to cost a whole lot more than we could afford, and doing all the value engineering and taking things out, which 10 years later we really wish we'd left in, but we just couldn't afford them at the time. You've never got enough storage space in these buildings. We made savings on the floor, which cost us money later on down the road in having to make replacements. So a huge amount of learning, and I now help other rugby clubs across Hampshire in a role that I've got with sort of facilities, trying to help other rugby clubs do the same thing. And I think really importantly is making sure that all of the lessons, clubs like us who've been through this sort of thing, that they're not lost, that other clubs aren't having to, reinvent the wheel every time and work out how to do things. So, it's rewarding to see if another club, goes down the same road and possibly has a few less problems, than us, then that's really good. But they'll probably come across some other problems, and other clubs can learn from them as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge commitment and time and effort and like you say, financially as well. Just in terms of that last bit you said, is there like a process now where clubs that want to go down this road or are trying to do the same thing, is there a process where they can find out this information, or is it very much they need to be asking the right person, or how does it work?
Well, so I could talk about the arrangements that we have within Hampshire, and I've just taken on a new role of chairing Hampshire's club development committee. So we have an approach where, to start with, we really need to understand all of the needs of all the clubs, where they're strong and what they need. For some clubs, it's improvements to the playing surface that they've got. Some clubs, it's floodlighting. Some clubs, it's the changing facilities. So really getting an understanding of where their needs are. Keeping abreast of the various funding streams that come available from time to time from Sport England and other bodies. Helping the clubs make sure that their governance and management is strong, so that they're in a position to take advantage of all of those things. So, and my understanding is there's similar arrangements in place, across all of the counties in England. But I've literally only just taken on this role in the last few weeks, so I'm still very much finding my feet in relation to that. And we're just about to launch in Hampshire an update on our facilities survey, so getting the clubs to be telling us exactly what they want, and it's the first time that will have been done since the pandemic. So, and we suspect that the data that we held pre-pandemic is it's probably out of date now and needs to be updated. But we are also very conscious of things like survey fatigue, that every rugby club is run by a small group of volunteers, and it tends to be the same old who are doing things, and people get very frustrated if you're asking them a question that you've already asked them, and I've told you that once, why do I need to tell you again? And so we're needing to be very careful about that, and we're trying to manage that as closely as we can.
Yeah, so it's good to hear you being very proactive with that, but also aware that proactivity could potentially put people off as well. Let's talk about the volunteer situation as well, because I think you've used the phrase earlier today, a happy bunch of volunteers or something like that, an army of people. How do you organise your volunteers at Ellingham, and how does it work?
We've got such a variety of volunteers in terms of coaches and managers of teams, people that help behind the bar, people that help in the kitchens, people that come out and help a few times a year doing the weeding and cutting the hedges and things at the club. We try and reward them as best we can with we always have a volunteers evening where we recognise and give them a couple of beers and something to eat and a thank you. We're looking at various different sort of ways of doing that. But the most important thing is people like myself as president and Lenny as chairman just going around and saying thank you to people. And actually, somebody who's helping out, you see them grow sort of 2 foot in height when they realise that what they're doing is really being appreciated, and actually getting the players to appreciate as well that, and whether that's the under sevens team or whether that's the first team, to appreciate that you wouldn't be playing rugby if it wasn't for all that volunteer support that's going in. There are some great initiatives as well at a sort of county and national level. There was the old Mitsubishi Awards, which I think are now being run by Honda, where each club has an opportunity to nominate their valuable volunteer, and they all get recognised. Everybody who's doing work gets recognised, but it works right the way through to one volunteer volunteer from each county getting invited up to Twickenham and having a dinner with the president and what have you. And those sort of things are really, really important. And one of the things I have set out to do within my role, I want to, in my first year as chair of the club development committee, I want to try and get to every club in Hampshire over the season, which my wife is going mad about, but I'm telling her it won't be too much because I normally get round to most of them every year, in any case, in one way or another. But I'm looking to be getting each club to be nominating their volunteer that I can say thank you to. So they're not just getting their thank you from the club, they're getting a thank you from the county level as well. And I think those thank yous are really, really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually met the National Volunteer of the Year award winner last year from when I was on the Great Rugger Run, a guy called Scott Lake down in Veal, and he had to get up on stage and be interviewed by Alex Payne and all this kind of stuff, and he said he had no clue what was going on and all that, but he was very, very proud of it. So that's a wonderful thing. Now, but just something you said there about getting the players to be thankful for the volunteers. How do you do that? Because I've definitely been involved in clubs and teams where all of that work remains unseen, and the players just probably don't even recognize that it's happening, or I don't know, it's just magic or something like that. So do you have any specific tactics or things that you do to try and encourage player appreciation?
It's something we're really focusing on this year, and we've got a director of rugby called Mark Johnson, who's a really inspirational guy, really full of ideas, and he's really drilling that into to the players and making sure that they are. And it was good to see we've had two midweek warm-up games, and it was still a warm-up game because our league opposition cried off on Saturday, but we had a friendly, and actually it was great to see the players straight away volunteering to be working behind the bar, volunteering to be serving the food in the kitchen and help clear up, and so that's really, really important. And we had a previous first team manager, a fella called Steve Anderson, and he always used the All Blacks analogy that I don't know whether it's true or not, but I'm told that every All Blacks team leaves the changing room tidier than they found it. So they leave it immaculate when they go. And if the All Blacks can do that, I'm absolutely sure Ellingham Thirds or Ellingham Veterans can do that. So using those sort of examples is important.
I love the one about working behind the bar. I think that's such a great way of integrating different teams within a club, different people within, all of that. And then obviously you're helping somebody get a beer, which is always a good thing. I think that's one of the very best ways. How does it work at Ellingham?
And we're trying to make sure that we build a bit of sort of one club feel. So we're trying to get some of the women's team to be working behind the bar on a Saturday to support, so the men who've just played don't have to go and work behind the bar, but on the basis that the men will work behind the bar on a Saturday, and the same is true that the women who've just come off the field can enjoy their beer in the bar without having to work there. So I think the more that you can do that, the better that is.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's move on to the Rugger Law Ball section. Actually, but before we do that, I understand you refereed to a pretty decent standard as well for an amount of time.
Yeah, reasonable standard. I certainly refereed up to National League level. Before, at the age of 40, they told me I was too old, and so I couldn't progress to the level that I was about to aspire to. And it was a rule they changed a year later, but by that time I'd already gone back to playing. But I enjoyed my refereeing, and I was always a better referee than I was a player, but I enjoy both of them, and I still referee today. As you know, I've refereed both of your nephews at different times, and I actually referee quite a lot on a Wednesday afternoon these days. And there's some really, I'm tied up at the club on a Saturday, so Saturday referee is difficult. But some of the Wednesday rugby, some of the sixth form teams, and some of the university teams are a pleasure to referee.
Yeah, so how did you get into it originally? Had you just got to a stage where you felt like you were done with playing but still wanted to be involved on a Saturday, or what was it?
Yeah, pretty well. It was also at a stage where we just had children as well, and I naively thought that by refereeing I was have more time for my family. I remember being on the railway station at 6 o'clock at Brockenhurst to get on a train to the Vale of Lune up in the Lake District, and realising that there was just as much of a time commitment at a certain level at refereeing as there was playing. But I that was my original thinking, was I'd have a bit more time for the family. But I found I was quite good at refereeing and thoroughly enjoyed refereeing. So that was it.
So what do you think about the laws in general? And that's a big question. Let me qualify that a little bit, because there's so many, and I strongly believe that nobody really knows, or certainly doesn't fully understand, every law. Like, as a referee trying to progress and go up through the levels, how did you manage that? And especially on a game day when players are probably going to be questioning quite a few things.
Well, there's quite a good story I could tell you about that, but I guess the first thing is to stress that we are talking about laws of rugby as opposed to the rules of football, and with laws comes interpretation, and that's really important. But when I first started refereeing, I went on a sort of beginners referees course in a school classroom in Fareham, and a fella there called Mike Gill was taking the session. Very, very good referee himself, and he went on to be my referee mentor as I got older. And he did something which impressed me times two, and that is the first thing he did with this bunch of sort of 30 eager young referees is he picked the law book up. And he threw it sort of 10 yards across the room, and it went straight into the waste paper bin with a beautiful clatter. He was a college lecturer, so I think it was a technique he'd mastered over many years. And he said, "That's the law book," he said. "We won't be needing that." And that stuck with me over the years, because I think refereeing a game of rugby and refereeing it well, you need to know the laws enough. But actually what you're doing is managing a game of rugby, and most of what you're doing is preventing things from going wrong. And if your communication skills are good, then you should be able to be doing that. And I remember Gilly saying, he said, you might not know all the laws, he said, but you'll know twice as many as those buggers will. And he was absolutely right. And how many players have you and I played with who barely understand any of the rules, but they understand they have to pick up a ball and run forward. But you can baffle them with something. And the most important thing is to be absolutely confident about it when you're doing it, and look at them in the eye. And even if you're wrong, they don't know you're wrong.
Well, that is absolutely perfect run into the Rugby Law Board section, because this constant analysis of the minutiae of every single refereeing decision nowadays, I'm starting to find it a bit of a bore, and it's not what the game's all about, in my opinion. Yes, we want to get the major things right and not have, big decisions that are going to affect big games in the wrong way. But how do you feel about that in terms of every single decision, it feels like, is getting overanalyzed as far as I'm concerned?
I think you're absolutely right. And if you look at the round ball game over the weekend, there's a lot of talk on television today about the VAR system that they have, where they've got the fantastic system, and yet the human bit behind it is still getting it wrong. And you will never get it absolutely perfect. And I think you can overanalyze these things to a fault, really. And again, going back to Gilly, he said they'll never criticise you for missing a knock-on the halfway line, but get the important decisions right. And actually, the decisions that mean whether a try was scored or not scored, or whether a player was maliciously looking to injure somebody and needed a yellow card or a red card. Those are the important decisions. You've got to get those ones absolutely right. And as a referee, you will never see everything. And at the top level, they've got not just their two assistant referees and cameras at every angle, but down at Ellingham Thursday, well, there's one referee who's there, who's got no support, and if he gets 50% of the decisions right, he's probably doing a good job. And I do think, by and large, certainly at the level that I still play at, most of us accept that the referees are doing the best they can. They're doing a pretty good job. They're certainly making less mistakes than we're making on the field, and you go with them. But there is sometimes a sort of that football culture around criticising every referee's decision that comes into it, and we do need to make sure we stay well away from that.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. We need to really push back against that quite strongly. It's something you said there about positioning of a referee as well, because an incident from one side of the ruck can look very different from the other side. So if you're stood on the other side of a ruck compared to the referee, it may look completely the other way around. And I think you just need to be aware of that as a spectator and as a player, that, you might not have the best view either.
Absolutely. Yeah. A spectator will see things that the referee doesn't, and the referee will see things a spectator doesn't, and you live with it. I certainly think my refereeing days helped me become a better player, because you realise what the referee can see and can't see, and you realise what you can get away with and what you can't get away with, and especially when you're playing at a level where there are no assistant referees, you know where the referee's line of sight is, and I guess the best players always, especially in the back row, always try to get away with as much as they possibly can.
So you're a poacher turned gamekeeper turned poacher?
I think probably true, yeah.
Okay, with that, we will move into the stash questions. So what is your favourite bit of stash that you've ever received?
Goodness me, I really I don't get excited too much about stash, which is really rare, isn't it? For I've got an old Ellingham first team shirt with a number 1 on the back. That's the old cotton shirt, and I think that's probably the one that I enjoy wearing. Sort of when I'm doing the gardening or whatever, much more than any of this modern stuff. But no, I'm not really a great stash man. Okay, although they've just given me the job of organising stash for the club, which could be a big mistake.
Okay, so what is your favourite kit of all time? So this can be any team from any era.
Any era. Goodness me, it's got to be a Lions shirt, isn't it? The red of the Lions, and the badge with all four of the nations on it. That's the iconic kit for me, I think.
Yeah, it signifies a lot of the best things about rugby union, doesn't it? Yeah. And this one might be a question for you then. What's an awful kit that you're seeing around at the moment? One that you just completely hate and would rather burn?
Any one of the shirts, I suppose, that is figure hugging. And I do remember a story I listened to. I think it was Matt Dawson talking about when Clive Woodward first introduced the skin shirts, and it required the players to change them at half time so that they could go out in clean white kit in the second half, and they reckon it took Jason Leonard the whole of half time to take one of those shirts off and put it back on, and I can well believe it. So no, I definitely don't like anything that's figure hugging at my age.
Okay, we'll bring this to a close now, but before we do, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, nothing I'd like to say, but just a bit for you, I suppose. And can you tell me a bit about the walks you're doing, and particularly the one you're doing up in Scotland, the Doddy Weir? What got you into that, and what you're trying to achieve through that?
Yeah, well, it's called the Great Rugger Run, and I've designed it and built it all myself, and it's just a combination really of my passions. So running and rugby and adventure and travel. And because I'm not, I travel all the time, I can't be involved in one club specifically. So I've missed the rugbyness in my life, So I wanted to combine all those things and hopefully visit a load of clubs, meet a load of rugby folk and raise a bit of money on the way. And yeah, like you say, this one's in Scotland. I'm not sure when this episode is going to air. It might be after it's all happened, but it's going to be for the My Name's Doddy Foundation. Obviously, Doddy Weir sadly struck down by motor neuron disease, and yeah, it sounds like as a disease it's underfunded and massively and needs more help. So yeah, I'm trying to do that.
Sounds like a great cause, and something that you'll have great fun doing. And make sure you let me have the link for it, and we'll get it communicated throughout the club. That sounds brilliant.
I will indeed. Now, if people want to get hold of you, maybe to talk about the club development stuff that you've mentioned, which I think would be incredibly valuable, what's the best way of them doing that?
Probably best by email, and that's Steve Benson 57 at btinternet.com.
Okay, perfect. So you people listening, thank you very much. We'll link everything up that we've spoken about in the show notes below. Lastly, Steve, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks very much, Tim. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks very much again to Steve. I'm so glad that my brother and nephews have found a great rugby club down there in Dorset. and so much of that is down to Steve. He's a man of huge experience and just damn good fun to chat with. So if you think he can help you, then I wouldn't hesitate to get in touch. All the contact details we mentioned and everything else are linked in the show notes, which you can find at amateurrugbypodcast.com. Now, we mentioned the Great Rugger Run as part of this week's show, and I'm sure you'll all be aware that the great man, Mr. Doddy Weir, is sadly no longer with us. I never got to meet him myself, but on my travels around Scotland, I met a lot of people who knew him very, very well. My thoughts and condolences are with you all. I was incredibly proud to wear Doddy's tartan and his name on my shirt on my 544-mile run around Scotland. And as Bruce Aitchison said, Doddy had a way of making you feel like you were his mate, even if you'd never met him. And that was certainly true for me. Of course, the run was in aid of the My Name's Doddy Foundation, and I'm delighted to be able to announce that the final total raise was a phenomenal £11,230. Thank you so much to every single person that helped, and especially to everyone that donated. But the work isn't over. There's still so much to be done. If you want to help keep Doddy's dream alive, then I urge you to sign up for Doddy Aid. Not only that, grab some folk from your club and do it together. You'll get an awesome Doddy tartan snood, and it'll give you extra motivation to get out and exercise away some of the festive season's excesses. Find out everything at doddyaid.com. Do it for Doddy and the entire MND community. Now, Christmas isn't too far away, so if you're looking for the best list of rugby-themed gifts this holiday season, then check out my curated list of goodies over on the website amateurrugbypodcast.com/Xmas. And I will be back with you next week when my guest will be Tim Abrams, head coach of Glasgow's inclusive rugby team, the Glasgow Raptors. Tim is doing phenomenal work north of the border, and this is an episode not to be missed. So subscribe in your podcast player of choice. Okay, time to go enjoy some more of a bud. And well, what I'm doing this weekend is I'm going to be a model for a yoga retreat company. And well, I've never done that before, which is probably no surprise to most of you. So tune in next week and I'll let you know how it goes. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, you could rate and review on your podcast player, like, share, retweet, all that jazz. But what I'd really like is if you mention it to someone in person the next time you're down your local rugby club. So until next week, get out and play. This episode was also sponsored by WebPie for all your WordPress website needs. Do you need a website, or do you know someone that does? Trust the rugby family and think of my company, WebPie, that's WEBPI, for your WordPress website design, build and support services. Find out more at webpie.co, that's WEBPI.co.